If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come, bring my spirits up. There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.
Welcome back to my coverage of the Kristin Smart trial, Monday, October 3rd, 2022, heading into closing arguments in the Salinas Courthouse, Monterey, California. Sorry about the morning voice. I'm actually on vacation and it's super early and I got up to finish this before everybody else gets up. So let's get into it. We start off the morning with Chris Lambert, of course, and he says there's some familiar faces in line today. 60 badges were given to members of the public, including Kristin's family, and my heart hurts for them. I pray for justice. Sheriff Parkinson's and District Attorney Dan Dow were also present, and Parkinson, of course, was the sheriff who helped arrest Paul, and the DA was the one who was able to finally put the charges on him. The first 45 minutes of court today were instructions for Paul's jury. Judge O'Keefe read multiple pages outlining Paul's charges and what the jurors will be asked during deliberations. According to Chloe Jones with the Tribune, she says the prosecution will begin around 10 a.m. SLO Deputy DA Chris Pavrell laid out the theory about what happened to Kristin. Going back to the beginning of the trial, where Paul was hunting Kristin for some time before the night she vanished, the prosecution laid out the timeline that Paul killed Kristin after the party and called Ruben to help hide her body. He said, "The truth is Kristin is dead, and the evidence is clear that Paul killed her." The prosecution flat out said, while the Smarts searched for Kristin, Ruben accumulated trophies in his bedside nightstand, and Paul kept raping women. Paul never said he did not kill her, not in the entire case, and when that was said, several jurors nodded. I don't know which way they nodded, side to side or up and down, but I have my guess on that. 4 independent cadaver dog teams hit on Paul's dorm mattress. What would Paul be doing with Kristin on his mattress, the prosecution asks. And he says, the same thing he did to Sarah and Rhonda Doe. He talked about Chola, the scent dog. When she hit on Paul's mattress, it was the strongest alert she'd ever had. Paul's heart was beating out of his chest when the detective first came to see him, although when the campus police interviewed him, he didn't seem nervous at all. The prosecution reviewed items found at Ruben's. He went over the other women who came forward with their own rape stories where Paul used date rape drugs to rape them, used ball gags, and even recorded his own date rape videos. The prosecution took some time going over the complete timeline as they presented it in court. As we've already heard in detail, it was all summarized in a nice package. They replayed the interviews with Paul where he lied and lied and lied some more. The prosecution, of course, maintains that Kristin was buried under Ruben's deck, dug up, and moved. He talked about how they knew the time was ticking on February 5th, 2020, when the search warrant was served at Ruben's house, which under the deck there was the perfect hiding place where they could keep watch over her remains. The prosecution reviewed the soil evidence, the fiber evidence, the blue star evidence in the cargo trailer. The prosecution said, quote, "We don't have a body, but we do have blood." He showed the jurors the photos again, including the presumptive positive blood test from the soil under Ruben's deck. The rest of the time, the prosecution spent tying the evidence directly to the judge's jury instructions. The prosecution told the jury they must believe Paul is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of first-degree murder and that Paul either raped or attempted to rape her. He explained that the law allows them to consider the other women who say Paul raped them. He told jurors that if they believe beyond a preponderance of the evidence that Paul raped the other women, they can conclude that Paul is inclined to rape women and may have raped Kristin before killing her. Remember, guys, we learned in our last episode with the experts, they taught us that this new rule of law was from the O.J. Simpson trial. That's when it was changed for the court processes. And it now allows this type of evidence in. And then to think the recently unsealed document when we learned Paul had hundreds of child porn photos on his computer. The jury can't even hear about that at all. And I've heard interviews with jurors from previous cases who were pretty irate after they found someone not guilty to later find out more truths, and the offender went on to hurt some other people. And that's a heavy burden for those people, and that better not happen here. Of course, Mr. Sanger objected throughout, saying the prosecution was mischaracterizing the jury instructions. The judge disagreed and allowed the closing arguments to continue. The prosecution reminded the jury that no one witnessed Kristin being raped, or Sarah Doe, or Rhonda Doe. And he said, quote, "They speak for Kristin." Side note, I find that powerful, and I've been feeling the same way throughout. They've helped be her voice, and I'm really grateful for those ladies. You're so brave, ladies. This right here was so right, Chris said it twice. Why reward someone for successfully hiding a body? The prosecution says he's asking of the jurors for them to be accountable, and he's saying, quote, "I ask you to render a truthful verdict." Mr. Purvell reminds the jurors that their verdict is not to be beyond all doubt. He reminds them everything in life is subject to some doubt, but he wants them to ask themselves, is the defense argument reasonable? The judge asks Sanger if he's prepared to begin his closing. He replies with, he didn't realize he'd be so quick. And then he chuckles and says, "Let me start up my computer." Side note, sometimes I wonder if he is aware he's in the court of law because he seems so surprised at the process sometimes. It's really strange to me. Okay, moving on. He tells the jurors their job is straightforward and they have to decide if a murder was committed beyond a reasonable doubt. Short answer is, it was not. Sanger, of course, isn't ready with his PowerPoint. This better not be a ploy for an appeal on ineffective counsel. The sloppier he gets, the more I begin to wonder. Sorry, that was my commentary. Moving on. He's been so bumbling. Back to the trial. He says he'll be ready in a bit, but must respond to Purvell first. He calls the prosecution theory a conspiracy theory, and if the jurors believe it, they must think that he himself is rude. And he says that's okay. Then he talks some nonsense that people love conspiracy theories, but they took an oath to follow the rule of law. Sanger accuses the prosecution of using the term dick tease repeatedly to get them to hate Paul. He accuses Jennifer of being a liar and says he'll be talking about that later. He tells the jurors they are free to think he's being unfair, and the prosecution is trying to bootstrap a murder where there is no evidence of one, according to Sanger. He rambles on with a few more odd statements about anyone having drinks in college with someone, and then he pauses and he says, "You know," with a question mark. I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean. It's weird. He asks for 2 minutes to hook up his computer and takes 9 minutes before the jurors are able to return to the courtroom. He begins the presentation, but the microphone won't work. And then Mr. Smarty Pants puts his attorney logo, the big logo, on the screen and calls the prosecution out for using their big seal at the beginning of their PowerPoints. He talks about presumption of innocence, and reasonable doubt is not imaginary or dreaming, and that it's not when you wake up and there was no trial. Side note, I'm sorry. This is so bizarre. Sanger admits it's a sad case, and of course, he does more victim blaming, one of his specialties. He details Kristin at the party and that she was kissing guys and falling down and blah, blah, blah. He points out inconsistencies with witnesses and their changing stories. He claims over 26 years, Paul's story has not changed. He reminds the jurors they can only use what they've seen in court. He says the case is built on passion, prejudice, opinion, and innuendo. He says it's not majority rules, but they all must agree. Singer tried to discredit the dog handler's evidence, and the prosecution objected, which was overruled, and Judge O'Keefe asked Singer to continue his closing. He needs to finish Tuesday because he didn't wrap it up today. I hope he doesn't throw the trial off again, since Ruben is supposed to have his closing arguments on Tuesday. Once Singer finishes, the prosecution has one last rebuttal before the case is handed to the jurors. Ruben's jurors are going to come in at 1:30 Tuesday, apparently, and hopefully things can proceed. Hopefully Singer's done with Paul's closing. And it'll be so interesting to hear Meesek's closings, if he has anything to say at all. The verdicts are going to be announced together, and of course, the jurors are reminded to not discuss the case, even with each other. All right, guys, we're getting so close. I can almost taste the justice, with slight apprehension, of course, because I've seen crazy things happen in trial. As I always say, justice for Kristin.
If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come.
Thanks for watching.
Bring my spirits up.
Don't forget to stop and smell the flowers.
There's some shit I